They told me they were tapped out. That's the exact phrase my father used, tapped out. Like he was some college kid who'd blown his last $20 on beer. Not a 63-year-old man with a paid-off house and 30-year-old man with a paid-off house and 30 years in the same engineering firm. My mother cried on the phone. Actually cried. Said they were living on a fixed income, that retirement wasn't what they'd hoped, that they wished they could help but their hands were tied. My son was 9 years old and he needed spinal surgery or he was going to lose feeling in his legs permanently. I want you to sit with that for a second. 9 years old. And his grandparents told me their hands were tied. His name is Eli. He's the kind of kid who still holds your hand in parking lots even though he's technically too old for it because he says it's just easier. He makes up names for clouds. He cried at the end of Charlotte's Web 3 times. The third time because, he said, he finally understood it. When the doctor showed me the MRI and pointed to the section of his spine that was compromised, I didn't hear most of what they said after that. I just kept looking at the image and thinking about his hand in mine in parking lots and whether he'd ever run again. The surgery wasn't optional. Without it, the nerve damage would progress. With it, his chances of full recovery were around 70%. Good odds, the surgeon said, for a case like his. The problem was the cost. Our insurance, the plan I'd had since I started working at the school district 8 years ago, covered 60% after the deductible. What was left came out to just under $47,000. $47,000. I didn't have it. My husband and I had maybe $9,000 in savings. Which sounds like something until you realize that's also our emergency fund, our car repair fund, our what if the roof leaks again fund. We'd been careful. We weren't reckless people. But $47,000 isn't something you just have sitting around when you're a school librarian and your husband manages a mid-size hardware store. So I called my parents. I hadn't asked them for money since I was 22 and needed first and last month's rent on my first apartment. I paid them back within the year. I've never been someone who leans on people, and I say that not to sound tough, but because it's true. I grew up watching my mother keep a ledger in her head of every favor she'd ever done for anyone, and I wanted no part of that system. But this was Eli. This was my son's spine. So I swallowed every instinct I had, and I called them. My mother answered. I explained everything. The diagnosis, the surgery, the timeline, the gap the insurance wouldn't cover. I kept my voice steady. I had the numbers written down in front of me because I knew if I started crying I wouldn't get through it. There was a long pause. Then she said she'd have to talk to my father. They called back 2 days later. Together, on speakerphone, which they only did for serious conversations. My father did most of the talking. He said they were so sorry, that this was heartbreaking, that they loved Eli more than anything. He said they wished they were in a position to help. He said the word unfortunately 4 times. He said they were tapped out. I asked if they could do anything, even alone, even partial. My mother made a sound like she was in physical pain. My father said, "Sweetheart, if we had it, you know we'd give it to you." I said okay. I said I understood. I said I understood. I said I understood. I hung up and sat in my car in the school parking lot for 20 minutes before I could go back inside. What happened next? I will never be able to fully explain because I still don't entirely understand it. I put together a fundraising page, one of those medical crowdfunding things that I'd always scrolled past with a small, guilty pang, never knowing what to say. My husband wrote the description because I couldn't. He's better with words than he lets on. He wrote about Eli and the cloud names in Charlotte's Web and the parking lots. He kept it short and honest and didn't ask for anything dramatically. He just told the truth. Within 4 days, we had $6,000. Within 2 weeks, $22,000. People we hadn't spoken to in years. Former students of mine, or their parents rather, people whose kids I'd helped find books. My husband's customers. A woman from my college roommate's church in another state, who'd never met any of us. Donations of 10, 25, 50 $. A few bigger ones that made me sit down when I saw them. One man, a retired teacher, sent $500 and wrote in the note, "I don't know your boy, but I know good kids exist, and they deserve a fighting chance. Go get him fixed." I printed that note out. It's still on our refrigerator. We raised enough. Not everything. We ended up taking a small personal loan to cover the last gap, but enough to schedule the surgery. Enough to move forward. Eli went in on a Tuesday morning in March. I held his hand until they wheeled him through the doors. My husband and I sat in the waiting room for 6 hours and 40 minutes. I know because I counted. The surgery went well. Better than the 70%. The surgeon came out smiling, which I hadn't let myself expect, and I burst into tears in a way that surprised even me. Ugly, gasping tears, the kind you can't control. My husband held me in a waiting room full of strangers and nobody looked away. I think most of them understood. Ely came home 3 weeks later. He walked through the front door on his own 2 feet. He said the hospital jello was actually not bad and asked if we could get pizza. We got pizza. For a long time, I didn't think much about my parents' refusal. I was too consumed with Eli's recovery. Physical therapy twice a week, follow-up appointments, the slow, careful process of watching him get stronger. I didn't have space in my head to be angry. I was grateful. I was tired. I was watching my son learn to trust his own body again, and that took everything I had. My parents called periodically, checked in on Eli, sent him a card when he had his 3-month follow-up. My mother sent a fruit basket when he started back at school. I was cordial. I didn't yell at them or freeze them out. I just felt a distance that I didn't know how to name. Then my brother called me. He's 3 years older than me. We were never especially close. He moved to Phoenix after college and built a life there that didn't include much contact with the rest of us. He called on birthdays, showed up at Christmas every other year, that kind of relationship. We were friendly but not intimate. He called on a Wednesday night, and he sounded excited. He'd just closed on a house, he said. A real house. 4 bedrooms, a pool, in one of those developments where everything looks like a magazine photo. He'd been wanting to buy for years, and it finally came together. I said congratulations and asked how he'd managed it. The housing market in Phoenix had been brutal, I knew that. He hesitated. Then he said, almost like he was confessing something, Mom and Dad helped with the down payment. I said, what? He said, yeah, they gave me a pretty significant chunk. I mean, I couldn't have done it without them. I asked him how much. Another pause. I probably shouldn't say the exact number, but it was a lot. They've been saving it for a while, they said, for something like this. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was standing in my kitchen, looking at the refrigerator where that retired teacher's note was still taped up, and I felt something move through me that I can only describe as the floor dropping out. They told me they were tapped out, I said. What? When Eli needed surgery. I asked them for help with the medical bills. They told me they were tapped out, that they were on a fixed income, that their hands were tied. My brother was quiet. Then, carefully, that doesn't sound right. No, I said, it doesn't. We got off the phone shortly after. I don't remember what either of us said to end the call. I sat down at the kitchen table and stayed there for a long time. I did the math in my head. I thought about what a pretty significant chunk for a down payment in Phoenix meant. I thought about what saving it for a while for something like this meant. I thought about my father saying unfortunately 4 times. I thought about my mother crying. And I thought about Eli in a hospital gown, waving at me as the door swung shut, trying to look braver than he was. I didn't confront them right away. I needed to be sure of what I was dealing with before I said anything, because I've seen what happens when accusations land wrong. People get defensive, stories shift, and the actual point gets buried under hurt feelings and denied intentions. I'm not wired for scenes. I'm wired for information. I called my mother a week later and asked, conversationally, how my brother's new place was. She said it was beautiful, that they'd visited to help him move in, that they were so proud of him. I said, I heard you helped with the down payment. That was so generous. She said, well, we've always wanted to be there for you kids when it really mattered. I said, that's wonderful. And I kept my voice completely even, and I got off the phone, and I cried for about 40 minutes. Because here's what I understood, fully, in that moment, it was never about the money. They had the money. The money existed. They made a choice. A deliberate, considered choice about who deserved it and who didn't. My brother needed a house. My son needed surgery. And they looked at those 2 things and they chose the house. I want to be careful here, because when I've told pieces of this story to people, some of them rush to defend my parents. They say things like, well, it's their money. Or maybe they wanted to help your brother get established. Or the one that really gets me, maybe they thought you'd figure it out. And I understand those arguments. I do. My parents are legally and technically within their rights to give their money to whoever they want. I'm not disputing that. What I'm disputing is this. My mother cried on the phone. My father said if we had it, you know we'd give it to you. They didn't say, we have other plans for our savings. They didn't say, we want to help your brother buy a home. They said they didn't have it. They looked me in the eye, or the phone equivalent of that, while my son's surgery was pending, and they lied to me. That's not a financial decision. That's a character decision. I called my father the following Sunday. I didn't do the slow burn or the indirect approach. I just asked him directly, how much did they give my brother for his down payment? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said they'd helped him with some of the costs. I said, Dad, I need you to be honest with me. When I called you about Eli's surgery, you told me you were tapped out. Were you? Another long pause. He said, it's complicated. I said, was that true? He said we had set money aside for specific things. I said, for his down payment. He didn't answer. I said, you had money set aside for my brother's house, and when your grandson needed spinal surgery, you told me you were tapped out. He said, it wasn't that simple. The money was earmarked. We'd been planning. Dad. I said it quietly. Don't. He stopped. I said, I'm not calling to fight with you. I just needed to know if it was true. And now I know. I hung up. Not dramatically. Just, I was done with the conversation, and I ended it. My husband, when I told him everything, was quiet for a long time in the way he gets when he's deciding whether to say what he actually thinks. Then he said, what do you want to do? That's one of the things I love most about him. He didn't tell me how to feel. He didn't try to soften what had happened or build a case for my parents. He just asked what I wanted. I said I didn't know yet. The thing was, even with all of it, the lie, the money, the deliberate choice, I couldn't make myself fully cut them off. I wanted to, in the hot, angry part of me that kept replaying my father's voice saying tapped out. But there was another part that thought about Eli, who loved his grandparents, who didn't know any of this and didn't need to, who would ask about them and miss them. And there was a part of me that thought about what it would mean to burn that bridge completely. Not just for me, but for all of us, for years and decades to come. I'm not a forgiving person by nature. That's an honest thing to say about myself. I don't forget easily, and I don't let things go quickly. And I've learned that about myself enough to work around it. But I also knew that whatever I did here, I had to be able to live with it. Not just tomorrow. In 10 years, when Eli's grown, when I'm the age my parents are now, and I'm looking back at the choices I made in this period of my life. So I didn't cut them off, but I changed things. I stopped performing closeness I didn't feel. My mother would call and I'd answer. But I stopped filling the silence the way I used to. I stopped asking follow-up questions, stopped sharing details about our lives, stopped being the one who held the family together through the effort of my warmth. I answered questions, and I was polite, and I was present. But I was no longer generous with myself in the way I had been. My parents noticed. Of course they did. My mother asked if something was wrong. I said no. She asked if I was still upset about the Eli situation. I said I was fine. I didn't fight about it. There was nothing to fight about it. There was nothing to fight about. I knew what I knew. About 8 months after all of this, Eli was back in school full-time. Doing well, going to physical therapy once a week as maintenance. My parents came to visit. They asked if they could. I said yes because Eli wanted to see them, and I wasn't willing to use him as a weapon. They were different around him than I expected. My father was attentive, patient, got down on the floor with him to look at some model he was building. My mother made his favorite dinner without being asked, because she remembered. And watching them with him, I felt the whole thing all over again. Not the anger, exactly, but the grief of it. The grief of knowing that these people, who clearly loved this child, had looked at the chance to save him and chosen something else. After Eli was in bed, the three of us sat in the living room. My father had his hands folded in his lap, which he only does when he's bracing for something. My mother kept rearranging things on the coffee table. My father said, We owe you an apology." I waited. He said they should have found a way to help when Eli was sick. He said they'd been thinking about it for months. He said they were sorry. My mother cried. Real tears this time, not the performed ones from the phone call, and said she didn't have a good explanation, only that they'd made a mistake and they knew it. I listened to all of it. I didn't cut them off or perform forgiveness I didn't feel. When they finished, I said, "I appreciate you saying that." My father said, "Can you forgive us?" I thought about it. I actually thought about it, sitting there, instead of just saying what would make everyone comfortable. I said, "I don't know yet, but I'm still here. And Eli's loves you, so we'll figure it out." It wasn't what they wanted. I could see that. They wanted the clean resolution, the crying hug, the moment where we all agree it's behind us. I couldn't give them that. Not honestly. What I could give them was the truth. I wasn't done with them. I wasn't throwing away 33 years of being their daughter because of this. But I was also not going to pretend that something fundamental hadn't shifted, that I didn't know something about them now that I couldn't unknow, that the version of my parents I believed in before that phone call was the same one sitting across from me in my living room. We can love people and see them clearly at the same time. I'm still learning that. Eli came padding out at 9:30 in his socks, saying he couldn't sleep, and my father pulled him onto the couch without being asked. And my mother started talking to him in that soft voice she saves for him. And I sat there in my own living room watching my parents with my son, holding everything I knew, and I didn't know whether what I felt was grief or gratitude or both. Only that it was real, and that it was mine, and that I wasn't going to pretend otherwise for anyone's comfort. The retired teacher's note is still on the refrigerator. Eli still holds my hand in parking lots. I still don't know what forgiveness is supposed to feel like, but I think it probably isn't a door you walk through once and close behind you. I think it's more like a room you keep returning to. Some days you get further in than others. I'm still finding my way.